Modern life is killing me. I don't wanna die inside this screen. Let me out of this cage full of crispy, creamy couches and cakes. We were born to move and to eat real food and to say hello. How do you do? Jump through the fire, swim to the ice, walk to the edge of who you are. Unbreakable, anti-fragile, a hardy boy in a modern world. Look in the abyss, over the cliff, into the eyes of who you are gonna become. If you face a pain, enter the challenge, play in the rain. Life is a battle. Who's gonna win? Is it you? Or is it them? I like shit sandwiches. I eat them for lunch, but not before I throw a punch. Magic swimming through me every time I move my body. Wake up, touch the light, not from your phone, but go outside. We were meant to move and sleep and eat and laugh and play like wild things. Life is not to be passively consumed, but instead to be actively moved. Wake up, the hunter inside, feel your DNA, bring you back to life. Don't waste your time on your phone, on the sofa, in a coma. Convenience and comfort killing me softly. I need to get harder, hardy. Say goodbye to Paul Smith and Louis Vuitton and Mr. Donut, and hello to Paul Taylor.
Today we're going to talk about the ways that supposed comforts of modern life are killing us and making us less fulfilled and happy and all that, and how maybe the way we're living isn't the way we're meant to be living, and there are better ways that are built into our DNA. Let's go back in time to before the modern times of how we used to live, how we used to move and eat and socialize and perceive and all of that. How did we used to be?
Yeah, so I'll start with a quote here, Michael, from Professor Frank Booth, who's a legendary exercise physiologist. This is from the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2012. And he was talking about the human genome as it relates to all these modern diseases. And here's what he said. The human genome has not changed in over 45,000 years. The current human genome requires and expects us to be highly physically active for normal functioning. Note the way he didn't say optimal functioning. He said normal functioning. He also, in that research paper, talked about our diet, and for all of human history, right? Homo sapiens, 200,000 years. And then previous to that, our other descendants, we have eaten food that has been alive recently and is natural. And now in most developed nations, about 50% or more of calories consumed are ultra-processed crap. We also sleep less. In fact, we sleep about an hour less than we did 30 years ago. So that's not good as well. And then our stressors, our ancestors had some really big stressors, but they also had a lot of downtime where they sat around a fire and told stories. And you look at hunter-gatherers today, still have that sort of lifestyle, but we are just always switched on. Even when we are relaxing, in inverted commas, we're being stimulated. And this constant stimulation of our nervous system, particularly a sympathetic nervous system, is really not good, particularly in the context of poor sleep, poor diet, and lack of movement.
There was also this kind of connection with, well, not kind of, very deep connection with nature in so many senses. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Look, we are outdoor beings. That's what we are designed to be. And now the average American or Australian spends up to 90% of their time indoors. And that's really not good, because our circadian rhythms, which everybody has heard of, they are primarily driven by light. And we also know that vitamin D, which we get the vast majority of our vitamin D from the sunlight, it's actually poorly classified. It should be called a hormone. And it actually activates more than 300 genes. And we know that if you have insufficient levels of vitamin D, it increases your risk of a whole host of cancers, plus metabolic diseases and other sorts of things. And now we're seeing that actually deliberate time in nature. In Japan, a series of studies have been done on forest bathing, of actually going and spending time in forests, actually improves your immune system, reduces levels of inflammation, has a positive impact on your gut microbiome. So these are all things that we are starving ourselves from with these indoor lifestyles that are also thermoneutral. We're never hot, we're never cold anymore. And that also has some disadvantages too.
Let's talk about this discomfort piece that we used to have, and that some stress, some volatility helped us, and how we can get that back.
So we need to introduce the topic of hormesis, which is a branch of science that is basically very well summed up by the words of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who over 100 years ago said, "That which does not kill us," and I'm sure your listeners could finish the sentence, "makes us stronger," right? And hormesis is sublethal exposure to stresses or toxins, which at high levels can kill you, but at low to moderate levels induce stress resistance. So we know things like cold water immersion is actually a hormetic stressor, or being cold actually activates stress response proteins that then upregulate lots of protective genes. The same with being hot, whether it's exercising in the heat, spending time in a sauna, or in a hot bath, activates these same stress response or similar stress response proteins that actually then activate protective genes. Exercise is another hormetic stressor. And with all three of those things, you do too much of those, you can die, right? But if you don't do any of them or do very little of them, you're missing out on nature's, I call it hardiness. This is what makes us hardier. By exposure to stress, our genome actually changes. It changes the activation of certain genes, because it's basically saying, hey, Michael, you might encounter this stress again soon, so we need to be prepared for that. So it activates cellular adaptive responses that it turns out make us net more healthy on a net basis because of exposure to intermittent stressors. We also know that some of the polyphenols and flavonoids in foods, particularly fruit and vegetables, are actually small doses of poison. Sulforaphane is a very famous one, released from broccoli, has anti-cancer compounds, not just broccoli, but that whole family: cabbage, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, all contain sulforaphane. And people talk about it being a powerful antioxidant. It's not. It's a pro-oxidant. It's a poison that actually persuades an insect not to eat it. So it's a cellular defense mechanism of the plant. But because we're much bigger than an insect, it only has a mild metabolic stress on our cells. And our cells respond to that by activating protective mechanisms, such as antioxidant defense systems, such as catalase, glutathione perioxidase, superoxide dismutase. These are like the special forces of your antioxidant defense system. So by exposing ourselves to small amounts of stress, our body actually reacts and becomes stronger And that lingers afterwards. So we get this net positive effect from exposure to intermittent stressors, whether it's nutritional stress, exercise stress, heat stress, cold stress, all of those things. And sunlight, again, too much sunlight will cause cancer and kill you eventually. Not enough sunlight messes with your circadian rhythms, your hormones, but also low vitamin D, which increases your risk of pretty much every chronic disease that's out there.
It kind of reminds me, when you're talking, it reminds me of Nicholas Nassim Taleb's books, like Anti-Fragile and Black Swan and all that, like having these stressors in your life, in your body, in the financial markets, in countries, helps you become anti-fragile. So when these black swans, these freak events come like cancer and whatever, maybe these aren't even black swans because they're probably predictable if you look at the data, at the scans of your body, that you can become more anti-fragile to these kinds of shocks. And another thing he talks about too is like this barbell strategy of like the main part of the barbell is like just 80% kind of safe, a risk off. You're just sleeping, taking care of yourself, but you have these stressors on the end, these weights at the end, and maybe it's the cold exposure, or heat exposure, or fasting, or hard exercise, and then those weights at the end kind of balance you out and make you strong. So yeah, maybe you must be familiar with Nicholas Nassim Taleb. So I see your head shaking, so I'll let you talk now.
Yeah, look, that word anti-fragile, I so wish I had come up with that word, because it's exactly the word. It's not about resilience. Resilience is bouncing back from stress. Anti-fragile, you think it makes you unbreakable. And it's such a beautiful term. I'm just like, oh, he's nailed it. There's nothing else out there. The one term that I am using more and more is hardiness. And there's a whole heap of research around hardiness, psychological hardiness. This is psychological orientations that help you to grow from stress. So resilience is bouncing back, hardiness is growing from stress. And I focused on my PhD on psychophysiological hardiness. So there's a lot of literature around the psychological or the benefits of psychological hardiness. But for me, all the stuff that we've been talking about to this point is about physiological hardiness, about how we grow from stress, right? And the easiest way to explain this to people is exercise. Exercise is only good for you because it's a stressor, right? If you're running, it's a stress on your cardiovascular system. If you're lifting weights, it's a stress on your muscular and skeletal system. And if we zone in, let's just take the resistance training. What happens? I'm just back from a session at CrossFit. And in that session, I will have created all of these micro tears in the muscle, right? And so right now, my body is adapting. My body is coming in to repair those micro tears. And it brings all of these exercise factors that are activated. That means that my muscle is going to repair itself to be bigger, faster, stronger. Athletes don't go to the gym to stay the same. They go there to become bigger, faster, stronger. And it's the combination of the stress on the body followed by the recovery that stimulates the adaptive responses to make us bigger, faster, stronger. And lots of people go, okay, yeah, I get it for exercise. But if you just think about your listeners or think about yourself, Michael, if you think about your biggest achievement in your life or the stuff that you are most proud of, right? And I'll ask the question to the listeners as well. I want you to think of something that you are most proud of, and did that involve stress and being out of your comfort zone? And for 95+% of people, the answer is a resounding yes. That is where we grow. We grow in psychological stress, not by avoiding stress, as long as it's not too much and too intense and too prolonged. That's the key thing, is intermittent exposure to manageable stressors. That is how we grow.
Yeah, even my favorite podcast episodes or conversations or relationships involve a little bit of that stress. Or even listening to a podcast episode when both the guest and the interviewer are all kind of just getting along and they're just spilling out their positive, normal quotes and things, and there's no tension. It's good. You get the information, but it's kind of fun when people challenge each other just a little bit. And you make a podcast and you interview people and you might disagree with some of them, at some points, but then just throwing them a little bit of you're not fighting, you're not punching them, you're not saying you're wrong, but you're kind of challenging them, maybe playing devil's advocate a little bit. That kind of conversation, it just feels better. And even say you're at the dinner table and people fight, in the end, it kind of makes for a better relationship. I don't think we should avoid these little fights. Maybe we should, but the people I love the most are the people I fight with the most, but you're not fighting all the time. It's these little stressors that afterwards it fixes some underlying problem or something, or you at least you connect on a real level.
Yeah, or you then adapt, right? It's that adaptation where you go, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe I'll just tweak my thinking there. And that's how we grow. We grow from challenge. That's the key thing for people to understand. Both physical, psychological, emotional challenges, they are the things that help us grow. As long as we recover afterwards, and as long as those stressors or those challenges aren't too much, too intense, too long. Right? Because everybody has a point where it is too much, but also your psychology going into that really influences it. So if we are both exposed to the same stressor, if I view it as a threat and you view it as a challenge, our physiology is fundamentally different. If you view something as a challenge, what happens in your brain? You become more motivated. You are, and what we call in psychology, you approach it, right? You lean in, you're motivated, you engage. But in your physiology, with that challenge mentality, it activates the fight or flight response and the chemicals adrenaline, noradrenaline. And that's the fight part of fight, flight, and freeze. So you engage with it. But if I view the same potential stressor as a threat, what happens is my motivation to engage is completely down, right? I tend to avoid, or I procrastinate, or I just get the hell out of there. And cortisol is actually activated with the threat response. And what we know about this is really, really important, right? So in you, those chemicals, adrenaline and noradrenaline, or you're Americans, you call them epinephrine, norepinephrine, right? Those chemicals have a half-life in the body of 1 to 2 minutes. That means after 10 minutes, those chemicals are negligible in your body, right? So you've dealt with that stress, you've moved on, and your body comes back to homeostasis. Cortisol that's released in me has a half-life of 1 to 2 hours. So that means that hours later, I still have significant amount of stress hormones running through my body, attacking my organs, interfering with my sleep. This is when people have those really stressful days and they lie down to try and go to sleep. They're shattered and their brain is on fire, right? So your attitude when you go into something is hugely important because it affects your psychology, your motivation, your physiology, and that can persist for hours, particularly in the threat response.
Have you always been this way, or did you change at some point and start to adopt this kind of mindset?
It's interesting because I was thinking about this actually, and I think my kind of whole life has led me to this path, right? So I was brought up in Northern Ireland in what we affectionately call them the Troubles, right? In the 1970s, when all sorts of shit was going on, people killing each other, bombs going off. And I was brought up in that environment. And I'm from a mixed marriage, which in Northern Ireland has got a different connotation. Normally that's a race thing. Northern Ireland's religion. And it was pretty taboo in those days. My mom was a Protestant, my dad was a Catholic. And my mom had to change her religion for them to be able to get married. And we were brought up as Catholics, but our entire lives we lived in Protestant neighborhoods. And so that's reasonably resilience building, going to school through your neighborhood in a Catholic uniform. So I think that was kind of one thing that helped a little bit with that resilience, because yes, there were stressful times, but it wasn't like, there wasn't attempted murder or anything like that. But it kind of developed that attitude where I would push back against things. But then I think the big thing for me was both sport. I think engaging in competitive sport can bring these traits to the fore or magnify them. But then I joined the military and spent 8 years in the military. And that is basically the whole military environment is set up as stress inoculation training environment. They have realized the British military have been training soldiers for over 1,000 years. And they've realized they need to train people to deal with stress, right? And they borrow that from the Stoic philosophers. Epictetus, the Stoic, said 2,000 years ago, we must all undergo a hard winter training and not enter into lightly that for which we have not prepared. And he was actually talking about life, right? So we do hard stuff in the military, and they employ progressive overload. And that's one of the key tenets of sports science and exercise training. You need to progressively overload your body or your brain in order to stimulate adaptations. But the progression can't be too much, right? So I think I just developed that. And now for my whole PhD, I'm in the area of resilience and hardiness. I've been into Stoic philosophy for years. And all of those things point in the same direction about leaning into stressors with the right character, right? About using them to help you to grow. And if you can't do anything about it, using it as an opportunity to sharpen your character or to practice virtues. And so that challenge orientation, I think it's been nurtured in me. I don't know how much nature was in there. I mean, we know there are certain genes around resilience that predispose some people, but certainly not predictive. I think all of this can be nurtured. And this is why I always say the most important thing for parents is don't shelter your bloody children. It's well-intentioned that we want to keep our kids away from stress, but you are doing them a disservice. You need to have your kids exposed to manageable stressors and employ progressive overload. And when they fail, don't pick them up straight away. Just let them try to learn their own lessons. And then you help them to learn their lessons and to re-engage, right? That's the key thing. That is how we actually grow and become more resilient.
Can you teach us more about Stoic philosophy and how that connects with this?
Yeah, so the Stoics were, I think they were the first psychologists, really. Stoicism was the first type of philosophy, particularly in the Western world, that was preached to the masses. So it was preached in Athens in the agora, the marketplace. And in those days, if you had a problem, you went and you listened to the philosophers, whether it was the Stoics, the Epicureans, or whatever, and they give you lessons. And the Stoics basically said that philosophy is the doctor's office for the mind, right? Which I absolutely love that. But they had the same problems that we had thousands of years ago. Worse. They had them much, much worse. And for the Stoics, all you needed to live the good life was arete, or character, good character. And this life of eudaimonia, that the way to do that was to bring your best self to any situation. And the Stoics were big that, we Epictetus said we are all actors in a play, right? And I'll paraphrase him here, but he basically says sometimes you get a shitty part in the play. We get a part. This is when they talk about fate, and for your listeners, I think the three things that are certainties in life are death, taxes, and shit sandwiches from the universe. And this is what the Stoics were talking about. We are all actors in a play, that sometimes we are given a role that we don't want. But what we need to do is to play our given roles well. So if you take Epictetus, he was a slave who was beaten by his Roman master to the point where he became a cripple. And he said, well, if it's my destiny to be a cripple, I'm going to be the best damn cripple that I can be. I'm going to play my given role well. And the Stoics said, if you've got parents who weren't particularly nice to you when you were a kid, rather than, ruminating on it and being angry about it, you play your given role well. It's like you're still their son or their daughter. And how do you play that role well within those circumstances? And for the Stoics, the big thing was this idea of the zones of control. So Epictetus' teachings, the Enchiridion, which was written by his student Arian, the very first line of the Enchiridion, of things, some are up to us and others are not. This underpins the Stoic zones of control. And according to the Stoics, the stuff that's up to us, and again, I'll paraphrase, but it's basically our belief systems, our attitudes, our behaviors, and most of all, how we choose to react to our circumstances. That is the one thing that no one can take from you, is how you choose to react to your circumstances. And the Stoics were big fans that when you're faced with stressors, you focus on the stuff that you can control and refuse to invest your energy in the stuff you can't control. And lots of people get in trouble psychologically today because they focus on the stuff they can't control. You know, their attention is in their own heads, struggling with their past or being anxious about the future. And often they're focusing on the things that they can't control. It's really about what can you control. And I'll bring in a bit of Japanese psychology because my wife studies that. And they have this beautiful term, which is very complementary to the Stoics, of arugamama. And it's basically, with things as they are, what needs to be done. So it's an acceptance of things, but it's not passive, right? Shit's just happened to you. Okay, you accept it. You're having a negative emotion. You're having a negative experience. But what needs to be done right now to move you forwards, right? That's the key thing, is not ruminating, playing the victim and going, woe is me. And I'll give you a very concrete example of this. I got diagnosed. I play soccer with a cardiologist, and I went to see him. I was in my 50s, and I said, mate, I just want to find out everything about my heart, how it's going. So he did a whole heap of tests on and found that I was born with a bicuspid aortic valve rather than tricuspid. What that basically means, you're supposed to have 3 leaves on your aortic valve. I have only 2 leaves, and over time it doesn't shut properly. So when your left ventricle pumps the blood out around your aorta through the rest of your body, that valve is supposed to shut. Mine, because it only had 2 leaves rather than 3, over time doesn't shut properly. So you get blood coming back in. We call that regurgitation, which can stretch your left ventricle. Eventually you get heart failure, or you can get a clot and an aneurysm, or your aorta can burst and you die. So he said, look, even though I was fit as a fiddle, I had this birth defect that was going to manifest itself in a very bad way. So he said, you need to have open heart surgery at some stage in the next couple of years. And I said to him, just book me in as soon as we can, because I just wanted to get it done. But I walked out of there, and the words of Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, just rang in my ears. I pity the man who has not faced adversity, because he has not faced an opponent, and no one, not even him, knows what he is capable of. So I went back and I wrote on my bathroom mirror, worthy opponent. And I wrote up a training program, and that's how I framed it, that this is my worthy opponent, that this is what I've been training for all my life. This is why I joined the military, why I did all that hard stuff, to prepare me for this worthy opponent. And I now get to choose the arena and when I face my worthy opponent. And I now have 6 months to prepare myself to face my worthy opponent. So I actually use that to actually take my fitness to another level, reduce my alcohol consumption even further, get tighter on my diet, because when you're going into that contest with a worthy opponent, you need to be at your damn best. Right? And that was the challenge orientation coming. Viewing that as a challenge allowed me to just focus in on what needed to be done so that I could face my worthy opponent in the best condition possible. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer to your question there, but
No, that's better. That means you actually care about this topic, and then the more you get into it, the more flow you get into it, then the more fun it is to listen to. I could have just sat here listening for another hour. That's fine.
Cool.
What are some things or lessons you experienced or learned in the military?
Yeah, look, I think lots of things. Combat, basic military training, is hard. That's a type of stress inoculation training. But you learn that you can't do these things on your own, that you have to help out your buddies when they're struggling and they help you out. And together we are better. And the military are very, very good at pushing you in that direction. And the lone wolves just get weeded out. That sense of mateship came through really, really strongly. I think a massive lesson for me was going through combat survival and resistance to interrogation training, which is 10 days of really hardcore stuff, followed by 12 hours of interrogation and stress positions and just stress upon stress upon stress. But you find depths to yourself that you never thought that you had. And most people out there have got no idea what they're capable of when they don't have a choice. That's the key thing. And actually, one of the best things that anybody ever said to me on my podcast was Dr. Stanley Beecham, who's an elite sports psychologist, written a brilliant book called Elite Minds. We were talking about this very stuff. And he said to me, Paul, what most people don't realize is that in order to lead your best life, you must take on as much challenge and responsibility as you can tolerate. And every now and then, you need to walk right to the edge of yourself and you need to stare into the abyss and work out what the abyss is telling you and take it on board. And then you walk back. And every now and then, you go back to the edge of yourself and you find that over time, you have to walk further to reach the edge. And I think most people intuitively understand what that means. It's in that discomfort that we grow. And every now and then, you need to really test yourself to see what you are capable of, to learn the lessons and to take them on board. And then you go again. Because my view and the Stoics' view, which I have really baked into my DNA, is that life is a contest. Life is a challenge, right? And every day you need to get up and be prepared for that. You need to be prepared that shit sandwiches may come in from the universe, right? But you've got to get yourself in the right physical and psychological state to be able to deal with those. And every time you meet those stressors, you view them as worthy opponents. And when you triumph, you actually go, this is me getting stronger. This is me being more prepared for life. Not trying to avoid stress. That's what makes us weaker.
And going to the edge, facing those worthy opponents, actually, yeah, it's good for us physiologically and psychologically, but it feels really good. And these are like our happiest moments. We're like, yeah, I did it. Like when you're a kid, you jumped into the pool, you went on your first roller coaster. And when you're older, I don't know, you tried this new thing. Recently I started playing with my intros a little bit. I'm making these little wacky little songs, which I'm a terrible singer, etc. But it's like fun, and I feel like really happy afterwards. Even though I made this crappy rap song or whatever that I don't know, maybe someone might be offended by or whatever, but it's like really fun for me because I'm trying something new. So very quickly, it becomes a very satisfying little experience by going to that edge, and maybe by going to the edge more of discomfort, we can also have a more fulfilling life.
Absolutely, 100%. It's the hard stuff that you have to earn that is much, much, much more fulfilling. And I don't suggest that people go to the edge every day, right? Put yourself right to your edge. Like going to the edge is hardcore shit, right? This is doing something that you are afraid of, something that is highly, highly, highly challenging and will use all of your resources, and you might fail. And that's okay if you do fail, because it's just an experiment, right? It's about experiments and gathering data about where you're good and where you could actually use some work, and then actually going back and doing the work, right? That's where you listen to the abyss and what it's telling you, and you take it on board so that every day you become better equipped to deal with this uncertain universe. Right. And you just wake up in the morning with that attitude. Right. And this isn't, I don't want people to think that my head's all like, geez, life is hard and I need to be prepared for this. Life is also amazing. Right. There's amazing shit that's on in our world, and meeting other people and other things that we do. But understand that it's not all going to be plain sailing. right? And it's that yes, you go and you enjoy all the benefits of a fruitful life, but you also, I think, and this is what I tell my kids, you got to train yourself for the bad weather, right? That's the key thing. You just can't wait until the shit storm comes and then you start trying to get the resources to be able to deal with that. It's like the athlete, and like the military, they all will say, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think we need that attitude in life.
And back in the day, before we had these comforts of modern life, and in the way some people are still living in, people in poverty or in certain societies, we were forced to have these stressors. We didn't choose it. It was just part of life. And tying us back to the beginning, I mean, food and movement and socializing directly tie into this. So how did we, what kind of, I don't want to say stressful ways did we move in the past, but how did we move in the past, and how do we move now, and how can we find some kind of middle ground, or perhaps get straight back into it? But I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah. So great question. And look, if you look at the physical activity guidelines in the States, in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, most Canada, they're very, very similar. 150 to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity a week, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous, or a combination of them, spread over at least 5 sessions and incorporating at least 2 strength training sessions, right? They are the general guidelines. Most countries, very, very similar, right? Now, the data in Australia shows that a bit over half of adults hit the minimum of 150 minutes of moderate. By the way, that's a minimum, right? But when it incorporates over 5 sessions and incorporating 2 strength training sessions, only 20% of them hit that. Now, what should we do? Now, there's a lot of evidence behind, if you get in those numbers, you will protect yourself against lots of chronic disease. You will optimize or certainly get your body and your brain in a great shape. But looking at hunter-gatherers, I think, is the best thing. And there was a couple of Harvard studies done in the last decade where they looked at the Hadza, who are a bunch of hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, East Africa. And at the time of the study, more than 90% of everything they ate, they got from hunting and gathering, right? So this is the best snapshot into what our genome, remember, this genome hasn't changed in 45,000 years. This is the best snapshot of what it was designed for. So what they did is they put pedometers on the Hadza to measure their steps, and they put heart rate monitors to measure the intensity of their physical activity, right? Because that's really key, intensity as well. And it turns out that Hadza women and girls across the age groups, when they averaged them out, they took about 10,500 steps a day. And data from 197 countries, or 111 countries, sorry, in modern population show that we average about 5,000 steps a day. Men slightly more than females, about 5,500. So Hadza women were doing double the amount of women and girls in modern societies. Hadza men and boys were taking about 18,500 steps a day. Almost 4 times the amount of men and boys in modern societies. But it's when they looked at the heart rate data that the big differences come out. The Hadza do on average 945 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every single week. That is between 7 and 10 times the amount of the average Brit, American, or Australian, right? So they moved at much higher intensities, right? They were doing more vigorous work. And they're not exercising. They're not out lifting weights and running. This is just a part of their lifestyle. But that's what our bodies were designed for. And now we see that exercise can prevent and or treat 26 of the most common chronic diseases we suffer from. This is Peterson and Saltin, 2 legendary exercise physiologists who did that research. And we now know that every time you're contracting your muscles, you're producing these molecules called myokines, which are signaling molecules that get outside of your contracting muscle into the bloodstream and have a positive impact on every single organ and every organ system in your body. They improve the health of your immune system, your stress response system. Myokines improve the health of your entire gastrointestinal tract. They help your pancreas to secrete insulin, your liver to dispose of blood glucose, both of which help prevent type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and other forms of dementia. Myokines help to regrow your blood vessels and your bone throughout your life. They help your skin to stay younger. And in the brain, myokines trigger the release of BDNF. This is a compound that helps you to create new connections between brain cells, even helps you to create new brain cells, and protects the brain cells you have against damage. Myokines, for me, understanding and harnessing the power of myokines is the next frontier of medicine. This is why I'm so passionate about movement, because it runs your biology. And that's why Professor Frank Booth's quote at the start is so, so important. You don't move, you mess with your biology. And I always say to people, mental health is huge now. I'd say if you're the average American or average Australian who doesn't move very much, has a shit diet, and doesn't sleep very much, good luck with your mental health. And I say that without judgment. This is just statements of science. If you're not moving well, your ability to have good mental health is massively compromised. We know that a diet high in ultra-processed foods increases the risk of anxiety and common mental health disorders by about 50%. We know that poor sleep massively increases your risk of depression and anxiety and other mood disorders. And then if you combine those three things and live a traditional lifestyle, this is why people are struggling so much with mental health.
Yeah. When I hear words like myokines, I know they're important, but then my brain, maybe I'm stupid or something, it kind of bugs out, and I'm like, oh, how do I remember this hard word? It sounds like a lot of other words, you know. What can you do for us to help us remember this? Maybe I don't know, you got a metaphor or some other way to explain it. I think I can remember it, but I might forget, and I fear.
You know what? I call them magical myokines. Just think, every time I'm contracting my muscles, I'm producing magic. That's what's happening. At a cellular level, you're just producing these little molecules that run all around your body, telling this organ and that organ and that organ to be healthier. We are now viewing muscle as an endocrine organ, a hormonal organ. It's producing these hormonal effects through these myokines. And they're just little magical molecules that are produced by movement.
How about food? I mean, it seems like common sense, but yeah, can you teach us some of the lesser known or often forgotten stuff about food?
Yeah, and look, I like to simplify nutrition. And firstly, anybody who tells you there's one diet we should all be eating is either demented, they're trying to sell you something, or they're a member of a cult, or potentially all three. What we know is that your genes, Michael, are different to my genes. So the optimal diet for you might be different to the optimal diet for me. What has become very, very clear in the research is that it's not about the fat or the protein or the carbohydrates. It's ultra processed foods that are killing us and killing our children. A recent umbrella review, like I've got literally close to 100 studies on the health risks of ultra processed foods on my laptop right now. But then there was this umbrella review, which is a review of reviews and collates all the evidence, and actually showed that increasing ultra processed foods in your diet dramatically increases your risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, anxiety, common mental health disorders. Like, the list was endless, and it was class 1 convincing evidence or class 2 highly suggestive evidence, right? What is an ultra processed food? Basically, the way I look at it, just to make it simple, is low HI is the way you want to eat, right? Low human interference. If you're looking at a piece of food and deciding whether or not to eat it, if you can see that it has been alive recently, it's either grown out of the ground, come off a bush or a tree, or it's run around on 2 or 4 legs, or swam recently, and it's been minimally interfered with by humans, eat it. It's fine. But if you're looking at a piece of food and you're going, Mr. Krispy Kreme donut, I don't remember seeing you running around on 2 legs, then it's in your treat food, right? 80-20 rule is the rule that I use. Roughly 80% of your food should have been alive recently and minimally interfered with by humans. In supermarkets, I'm sure it's the same in the States. You're in the States, right?
I've been living in Japan for the past 13 years.
Oh, right, right. But do an experiment for me. I want you to go into the supermarket. All the healthy foods are around the outsides. That's the case in Australia. It's the same in the States. It's probably the same in Japan.
Same here.
It's the middle aisles you need to look for. The prepackaged stuff that you look at it and go, you were never alive. If that's the case, then it's in your treat food. I'm not saying never eat it, but it should be 20%, right? That's why you can look at all meat, all fish. You look at that stuff, you go, yes, you've been alive, right? You see a piece of steak or a fish fillet or a whole fish or whatever, you go, you've been alive. But then you look at a sausage roll, you go, you've never been alive, right? That's the key thing. Or you've been highly processed by humans. And it's the same if you're plant-based. All fruits, all vegetables, beans, peas, lentils, all of that stuff. Impossible meat burgers, ultra-processed shit. Don't touch that stuff with a barge pole. Look at the ingredient list. The ingredient list on all of these fake meats is ridiculous, right? Soy burgers, it's all shit. It's minimize that stuff. Eat the stuff that has been alive 80% of the time, and you will be sorted in terms of nutrition.
It sounds like movement is actually the core piece connector to all of these things. Of course, move our bodies, but also eat food that moves or recently moved. And even with social connection and technology, interact with people in a way where you're kind of moving. Now we're doing these sort of compound non-movements of sitting on our sofa, eating junk, on our phone, talking on Instagram or something. And it's like the core connector to all of these things that are kind of killing us and making us unhappy too, is like we're not moving and our food is not moving and we're not moving together.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, yeah, that's very true. It's very true indeed. And we know that these things are hugely important on their own, but they're also additive as well, right? So again, I'll give you an example of this. When you exercise, what we see in the research, people, when they start an exercise program and they keep it, say this is an unhealthy person, right? And they start an exercise program and they keep at it for 6 months. Often we see in the research, they then start to engage in other healthy behaviors. They'll tweak their diet, they'll reduce or stop their smoking or their drinking or whatever it may be, right? And what we now know is that regular exercise grows volume in your frontal lobes. You see it in brain scans that people who have been sedentary and then regularly exercise, their brain volume increases, especially in the frontal lobes and especially in the areas to do with willpower and self-control. So exercise has been called a gateway behavior in that it opens the gates to other healthy behaviors because you're building your self-control muscle. And research shows from the Dunedin study, which is this longitudinal study that have been following people for 40 years. And it kind of the same as the Walter Mischel study on the marshmallow experiment that you may have heard of. Self-control is the single biggest predictor of success in life. Above intelligence, above socioeconomic status, above anything, someone's self-control is the most predictive factor of their success in life. And the way we build it, the best way to build it is regular physical activity.
And we know that, and I know that. Like even before this interview, I started this at 10:30 a.m. I had plenty of time to go to some pull-ups in the park or whatever across the street, but I didn't. When we often just don't exercise, how do we get that engine revved up and just do it, but we can't. Maybe we can just do it, but what are some ways we can get past that barrier of entry?
Yeah. Look, particularly if people have been pretty sedentary for a while, it's hard. I'm not saying this stuff is easy. Of course, it's hard. But the first thing I would say around exercise is try to find something you enjoy, right? And try to find something that involves other people. Because if it involves other people or a team, you're much more likely to do it in the times when your motivation is low. That would be my first bit of advice is do something that you'll enjoy. But then anything that you're doing, whether it's going to the gym, walking, running, whatever, you need to analyze your performance. If you're lifting weights, write down how much you're lifting. If you're running, how fast are you running? How quickly? How much distance can you cover in 20 minutes? Run out from your house 10 minutes and run back, right? See how much distance you cover and track it over time. because the single biggest predictor of sustained exercise is self-efficacy, the belief that what I'm doing is making a difference. It's when you see those numbers improve, right? I'm running faster. I'm covering more distance. I'm lifting more weight. That actually tells your brain, hey, this shit's working, Michael. We need to keep going. That self-efficacy, the belief that what I'm doing is making a difference, is the biggest driver of long-term behavior change. And then the other thing I would say is get out of this idea that I have to go to the gym or I need an hour for any sort of benefit, right? I'm just going to turn my screen and you can see over there kettlebells and club bells right there. I've got this stuff beside my desk and I'll just get up and I'll do kettlebell swings, right? Or I'll use club bells. I often do stuff in the workplace, do a 30-second sprint, right? When you've been sitting. When you're on the phone, have a rule. You do not sit when you're talking on the phone, right? So it's these, I call them little movement snacks that we're now seeing in the research. If you do regular movement snacks throughout the day, it has a huge benefit on your life over years, right? It's the little things that you do consistently that have massive impacts over time. Not about joining a gym, getting all excited, paying them for a year's membership, going for a month, and then giving them the rest of your money and not turning up. It's not about doing the friggin' lemon detox diet for 10 days and losing weight and then reverting back to eating shit food. It's the stuff that you do consistently that has the big impact over time.
And for me, and I think a lot of people, the phone is one of the big problems. I'm trying to find a strategy of how to. There's different ones. You could put little. There's digital health apps and things where you're like, okay, you've been on it for 2 hours now. You got to stop, or these little things. But I don't know if that works. I started one thing that your little standing up and using the phone thing reminded me of is I had this rule for a few months, and it was pretty good, where I would only use my phone outside, which is kind of bizarre. So it forced me to get outside into the light.
I like that.
And then it had me moving, but then also like before I would enter my house, I would shut it off. And it was like really hard to keep doing because sometimes you want to use it in your house, but I was definitely happier and I was getting more done and I was probably healthier. What are your sort of strategies or little experiments that you've tried with your phone? And I know we can't get rid of it, but how do we minimize the damage or the usage?
Yeah. So I love your idea of rules. I'm a big fan of rules. So, for instance, I've got a rule. If I'm drinking alcohol, I have to go to the gym before, and the next day I have to do a workout. Otherwise, I'm not allowed to drink alcohol again, right? So having some rules, hard and fast rules, are really key. The thing that I like people to do, I've been focusing more and more on this, is, and this again is a Japanese psychology quote, is that your life is based on your attention. Attention drives everything in the brain. So I like to get people to do an attention audit. Where has your attention been in the last 24 hours? So you look at your screen time. You look at the amount of time that you spent watching television. You look at the time on your phone. You can see it on your phone, right? It doesn't lie. And then you think, oh, I watched Netflix for an hour and a half last night, right? And then I was at work, so X amount of my attention was at work. But then what else? How much of your attention was spent on quality relationships? How much of your attention was spent on exercise and on eating healthily, right? But particularly in your free time, where is your attention gone? And if you think we're in bed for roughly 8 hours. Let's just say roughly, right? This is a typical working day. We're at work for roughly 8 hours. That gives us another 8 hours. Where is your attention? And if you look and you've got 2, 3, 4 hours of screen time, that's going to be repeated, right? If you take out the sleeping and the working, somebody who's having 4 hours of screen time a day, that's half of their non-working sleeping life that is focused on their phone. Is that the life you want to live? Where half of your entire life is in a screen, living vicariously through others, being entertained. You show me one philosopher who ever said, that the key to a happy life is being entertained. These are the people who are, I call them passive consumers of life, not highly engaged participants. The people who are highly engaged, they have hobbies, they have meaningful relationships, right? They do physical activity that they enjoy, right? They're engaged, they're into life. And more people are spending increasing amounts of their free time in the confines of four walls with their heads buried in a bloody screen, and their lives are being hijacked. And do that attention audit and ask yourself, is this the life I want? Do I want to be in my 80s looking back on my life and going, half of my free time was spent with my head buried in a screen, not in the real world?
I feel lucky. I feel lucky that I was born at the sort of twilight of the pre-phone days, and playing outside in the '90s and stuff. And I had a real childhood in that way. And I go to some countries like I've been to Cambodia, and there people are not on their phones, and people are playing outside together. And I felt like I'm back in the '90s now.
Yes, I've been to Cambodia and I see exactly the same. But
Yeah,
you go to Singapore, you go to Korea,
yeah,
it is completely different,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And in Singapore and Korea, the rates of myopia have gone through the roof. Childhood myopia, which is short-sightedness. Look how many Korean and Singaporean kids wear glasses. Why? Because they spend all day long with their heads buried in a screen. And it's affecting their eyesight and destroying their mental health, right? Is that the life that we want for ourselves? Like social media is hijacking our children's lives, and it's hijacking lots of adults' lives as well. That's the key thing. I'm not a big fan of social media. I'm on it a little bit, and I know that I could certainly grow my business a lot more if I was on it a lot more. But that's not a trade-off that I want. That's not the life that I want to live for myself. But everybody's got to make their own decision.
Yeah, I've had this on my to-do list, is like start making Instagram clips and do this YouTube short video things. I never got around to, and it's like a thing that keeps growing on my list. I'm like, okay, make a clip for Paul, make a clip for Mary, blah blah blah, and I just never do it. And I feel like I should, but again, maybe it's just not worth it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, it's not the life that I want to live. So I go, you know what? I'm happy to trade off that my business won't be as big, but do you need your business to be that huge, right? We actually need to live life. Yeah, and all the research shows it's about social connectedness. It's about being of service to others. It's about doing good. It's having warm relationships. It's about feeling part of a tribe and a contributing part of that tribe. That is what leads to a life of human flourishing, not spending all your time generating clicks and likes on social media. It doesn't do it for human flourishing. It just doesn't.
But our phone usage is largely driven by our desire and need to connect, and now, unfortunately, a lot of the avenues for connection have been consolidated into the phone, even dating and talking to people. How do we can't completely break free from the culture, but maybe there are ways, little pockets of the existing culture or infrastructure or something that allows us to connect in the ways we maybe used to. And maybe you can comment on how we humans used to do things, not just back in the '90s, but back in like the minus '90s or whatever.
Yeah. So my good mate, Professor Grant Schofield, did a lot of study on this and found that kids in the 90s would roam on average about 5 miles away from their house, about 8K, because they'd be on their bikes and just off, right? Kids these days roam on average about 400 meters from their house because they're spending all their time indoors. And I get it for any parents who are listening. It's hard. I got a 14-year-old boy and a 19-year-old girl. And it's even worse for the 14-year-old boy because all of his friends are gaming and they're on Snapchat and they're doing all of that. And we're saying, get out on your bike, go and visit your friends. And he's like, they don't want to come out. That's the key thing. They don't want to come out. So I end up going out with my little guy and going and playing soccer with him and getting outdoors and stuff like that. And it's hard and it becomes relentless. And these things are designed to be addictive, right? They are, particularly the social media stuff is designed to be addictive and they're hijacking our kids' lives. And lots of parents will say it's an ongoing struggle. It is, but it's the struggle that you have to have, because the alternative, what we see in the data, the more kids spend times on their phones, the more their mental health and their physical health is compromised, right? And this is where it's about having rules. So we have rules in our house, right? That Oscar, my little guy, he's allowed 1 hour of screen time a day, right? And he's got to choose between whether that's his phone or he's watching TV or whatever. And he's allowed 2 hours on the weekends. But he has to have time outside, right? So he plays soccer. He trains 3 times, he plays at quite a high level. He trains 3 times a week and he plays on the game, but he also has to have outside time. And then on the school holidays, we say you need to accrue 90 points of physical activity before you're even allowed on a screen, right? So moderate physical activity, being out on the bike, is a point a minute. If he's doing like exercise, he gets 1.5 points a minute. So we have that thing. He has to have done some exercise before a screen is even allowed. And then it's a certain amount of time, and that time is measured. And then the kids need to allocate it and go, okay, well, if I only have an hour during the week, where am I going to spend it? And I've got 2 hours in the weekend, where am I going to spend it? So it starts to get them to think about not just, I want to use it, I want to use it, I want to use it. They have to learn to self-regulate. And here's the point of this, right? And we constantly talk to our kids about the research. Me and my wife both work in this area. So my daughter is 19. She is at university in Melbourne, in the city, in the halls of residence. And still, I will get pop-ups on my phone saying, Kira's requested more time for TikTok. Now, she has about, I think it's 8 minutes a day on TikTok, 10 minutes a day on Snapchat or Instagram. I don't think she's on Snapchat. And these were rules that were set in year 11 and year 12 over here around exams. And we said to her like a few weeks ago, Kira, you're 19 now, you're an adult. You know, we can take this stuff off your phone. You can self-regulate around this. And she's like, no, I don't want to, because I know that if it's just free, I'll be on it more. So I want to keep that approval. So if she wants more time, you know, on Apple, the phone request comes through and we have to approve it. And she wants to keep that because she's seen the other people at university who are just addicted to their phone. So it's about trying to set up that process early and fighting the fight. You have to fight the fight. And after a while, they will accept it as long as the rules are very clear and they're consistent and that both parents are consistent. Because kids are pretty freaking sharp. They'll know, hey, if mom or dad is a little bit weaker on it, I'll just wait till mom isn't around. I'll go and ask dad for more time and he'll agree. And they will play you off. So you have to be aligned and you have to be consistent. There has to be rules around it. And those rules can't be broken, right? Even when you're stressed or you're trying to get work done and they're pestering you. It's like boredom is great because that's what drives creativity. And often our kids have come to me and go, I'm bored. And we're like, awesome. I've got a massive list of jobs for you, right? And after that, they go and they find creative ways to keep themselves engaged, right? They read a book, they do puzzles, they play card games, whatever, the stuff that we used to do that is really important.
Yeah. And sometimes I think I want no rules. I throw away all these systems and rules in my life because they're like the one with the phone, for example, or there's been a bunch of other ones. But then I find that actually I'm happier to sacrifice some of this supposed freedom or whatever and chaos and start to put these restraints in my life. And I guess everyone's going to have different rules and systems that work for them. Maybe you don't want to share your particular rules, but what are some rules that you set for yourself, not for your kids, but for yourself that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, look. I certainly have rules around exercise that I have to exercise every day. My kryptonite, my weakness would be dark chocolate. I love 85% dark chocolate. I'm not allowed dark chocolate unless I've exercised. Also, alcohol. Being Irish and ex-military, I like a tipple. So I have a rule: if I'm going out to have a few drinks, I have to have exercise beforehand. And I have to exercise the next morning. And my wife will say, like, sometimes she's done, like, my binge drinking is nowhere near what it used to be from my university and my military days. But occasionally I'll go out with my mates and have a few too many drinks. But I will always get up and first thing in the morning, do a tough physical workout, because I learned in the military, you can't turn one bad day into two. That's the key thing, right? And we have rules around nutrition. That 80-20 rule is one that we follow reasonably strictly. We don't calorie count, but just roughly 80% of the stuff that goes into your gob on a daily basis should have been alive recently and minimally interfered with by humans. They would really be the rules that I have. No phone in the bedroom as well. That's a big one, which becomes more challenging when you have a teenager who's out late at night. That's the exception when we'll bring the phone into the room in case they're in trouble. But I think things like that, I think that's a hugely important one. Like no phone in the bedroom. And people go, it's my alarm clock. Buy a $10 alarm clock, you tight arse, right? I always say to people, if your eyes look at your phone before your feet hit the ground in the morning, your life is screwed. And you need to have a bloody good look at yourself.
And just to close this off on a soft note, to remind people that we don't need to push ourselves 24/7, that there is some easy yet healthy parts of life. What are some of these healthy and actually happy exercises and activities and things that we can do that aren't all hard and requiring resistance and grit and hardiness and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, spending time in nature is hugely beneficial. Going out for a walk in nature, right? Or going for a run in nature. That's the stuff you'll notice that you feel good afterwards, right? Doing exercise that you enjoy, some form of sport or interaction with other people, that's what really brings the enjoyment, right? Finding healthy food that you actually like and then savoring it and telling yourself how nourishing that is, right? Spending quality time with your kids, your friends, right? Carving an hour out of your diary every week and saying, I'm going to go and meet a friend face to face and actually have coffee. And I'm going to deliberately keep my phone in my bag or my pocket during that meeting, right? And you'll find that you actually enjoy that interaction much more. And then if exercise is something that you think you should do, but you're not there yet, just doing little movement snacks throughout the day and then just ticking them off, right? I've just done a 30-second movement snack there. And then an hour later, you do another 30 seconds. And every time you've done one, you just go, nice work, Michael. Your future self is going to thank you for that, right? I think anytime you do something that's a little bit hard is actually saying to yourself, hey, my future self is just gone, high five, dude, bloody good work, right? That's what makes the hard more manageable. And what you'll find if you employ that slight progressive overload, most people actually, after a while, start to enjoy the hard stuff. It's just the walking to the edge of yourself that's really difficult that you need to prepare yourself for. And you do it every now and then.
Yeah, and I remember back when I first started working out, I went through high school being super, super skinny. I think I was like, 110 pounds or something. And I was a complete loser because of that, of course, like tiny little thing.
Yes.
But then before my senior year, I started like working out like crazy. And now thinking back on it, what made that possible, how I actually did grow, I'm not massive or anything, but I'm not 100 pounds, is I would go to the gym and I'd carry around like a little notebook like this and record every little, how many reps, how many sets and all that kind of thing. And that was really nice. It made it more pleasant, but also it worked better. And maybe I should start carrying this around or some kind of tool around and marking down these little stressors and things that I'm doing. What kind of tools or technologies or whatever do you use or can we use to help us with all of this?
Big fan. Look, my wife is much better at this than me. This is one thing I'm working on, is journaling. Morning and night, right? When you wake up in the morning, just fill out your journal. Well, how do you want to be today? What virtues or behaviors do you want to exhibit today? What do you want to do around your exercise, your nutrition, right? Set intentions. And then in the evening, reflect on it. Okay, here's what I said I was going to do. What did I actually do? Okay, what worked and what didn't work? What needs some work? That continuous setting intentions and then reflecting, you will notice that you start to become more cognizant of your behavior over time with that intention setting and the reflecting, because it's about who you want to be. Because your life is based on your habits. It's the stuff that you do repeatedly that's really, really key. And I would endorse people, if they're exercising, what really is very clear, lifting weights tends to be more enjoyable for people than doing cardio. And thankfully, there's become more of a shift towards lifting weights. And I say to people, everybody needs to lift heavy shit. But to your point, having that little notebook and writing down your sets and reps and seeing yourself getting stronger, that is what makes this stuff really enjoyable, because it's like, yeah, shit, I'm achieving, I'm adapting, I'm getting better. That's what drives us to then into that intrinsic motivation where we actually love it. And now, if me and my wife are not at CrossFit, we notice the impact, and we'll deliberately do stuff at home because we know how we feel after exercise. That's the key thing. How does it make you feel afterwards? Forget about this idea of exercise to lose weight. I think my last comment for people, we need to stop obsessing about weight. We need to talk about fitness and strength. So if you're overweight, don't worry about it. Get yourself fit, get yourself strong. You are way, way, way better to be overweight and strong and fit than to be normal weight and unfit and weak.
Thank you so much, Paul. If people want to connect with you, it shouldn't be too hard, but where do you recommend they go?
Yeah, look, best place, my website, paultaylor.biz, and Instagram, I'm just at paultaylor.biz. And then the podcast, I think, is probably the one, if they like what I'm talking about, it's the Paul Taylor podcast. That would definitely be the place to get more info.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. I got to go do some pull-ups now.
Excellent. Good stuff, Michael.